Good morning, and thank you for joining me today. It's Allan Laboucan with the Rocks and Stocks News Show. It's Wednesday, the 8th of October, and I've got a special show today that I'm covering only one company and it's because they had some very important news, and that is from McEwen Inc. and McEwen Copper. Uh, I've often used McEwen Inc. as an example of when I'm talking about tremendous value propositions in the mining sector, and they have this important news out that lets me put a little bit more meat on the bone of why I think that's the case. And so, first, I'm going to talk about the news, and then sort of where I see things going forward, and a look at their stock chart. So, let's start with the headline: Los Azules feasibility study confirms economically robust copper project with leading ESG performance. McEwen Copper, which is 46% owned by McEwen Inc., announced the positive results from the independent feasibility study for its 100% owned Los Azules copper project in San Juan, Argentina. The feasibility study confirms Los Azules as a long life, low cost producer of high purity copper cathodes with strong economic returns and sustainability. The project design advances Los Azules towards construction readiness within a framework that reduces its environmental footprint. Project risk has been further reduced through a strategic collaboration agreement with the International Finance Corporation, which is a member of the World Bank, to potentially lead debt financing and additional funding proposals for infrastructure and construction. With these results, Los Azules is positioned to become a supplier of responsibly produced copper, critical to the global energy transition towards a low carbon, sustainable future. Rob McEwen, who is the chairman and chief owner of McEwen Inc., stated, and I quote, the Los Azules feasibility study is more than a technical milestone. It's a blueprint for the future of copper mining. We have delivered a plan for a long life asset that will play a role in the world's clean energy transition. Copper is the foundation of electrification in the modern world, and Los Azules is ready to contribute to that global supply chain responsibly, efficiently, and profitably. He went on, with this feasibility study, our team has transformed the geological potential of Los Azules into a clear, actionable development plan. This work gives us confidence in the project's design, cost, and schedule, providing the foundation for the next stage of growth. End quote. So Rob brings up a point here that he, it's often difficult in a news release to write, the full picture, if you will, because the news release would end up going on and on. But the when he talks about the future of copper mining, this is to get a sense of that. They've done a video that presents what they're planning on how they're planning to build the mine. And it's a very unique design for a copper mine. It's quite incredible, and I think that you should watch that video to get a better sense of what he means when he talks about a blueprint for the future of copper mining. And he also talks about contributing to the global supply chain of copper. And when you sort of consider the current supply chain, which I think is broken, There's not enough. The copper miners, they can't grow their mining production enough, rapidly enough to meet future demand. There's not enough projects that are in development, and the discoveries have fallen off a map in the last 34, 35 years. You know, there's less of them, and they're going deeper into the ground for lower grades. And so this presents a case that the supply chain has long-term problems that I think to incentivize fixing that, you need a much higher price of copper. You know, I actually believe you need copper to be almost twice its current value to incentivize more exploration, to get more important discoveries into the pipeline, which would mean an increase in the projects in development, which would help towards replacing the old mines that are being mined now with new mines, because I don't think people really realize that we've got a state of emergency somewhat in the supply chain of copper when you put it into the context of what is coming, what we currently need it for, and also what's coming in the not too distant future. You know, artificial intelligence, electric vehicles, and robots are all going to need much more copper than what the copper mining industry can produce. And with the broken supply chain, that situation is going to stay that way for a long time unless the price of copper goes up dramatically. When I say dramatically, I mean like double its current valuation to bring more of these development projects online faster, and also to build up the exploration of and finding of important discoveries that can be future mines. You know, folks, copper mines don't just get turned on tomorrow. They take a long time to find, a lot of money to find, money to build, and we are coming into a time when there is going to be supply problems, significant supply problems that will drive copper higher. So, you know, that global supply chain issue for copper is really important for people to pay attention to. Um, so Michael Medding, who's the vice president of McEwen Copper and general manager of Los Azules, he stated in the news release, and I quote, having significant experience with large-scale construction and mining operations in Argentina, I am confident that we have the right plan, the right team, and the right partnerships to develop Los Azules. Together with our local communities and government partners, we aim to create Argentina's first regenerative copper mine, a model for responsible and innovative mining. End quote. And I might add that this also puts copper cathode into the pipeline in Argentina. What makes copper cathode is you're producing sheets of copper from the mine. You don't have to have it sent off for refining and smelting in other countries and then brought back. You can do that added value right in country, and that's a tremendous opportunity for the country of Argentina's economy as well. So then there's the highlights of the feasibility study in the news release. So takeaways, economic after-tax NPV of 2.9 billion, IRR of 19.8%, copper, payback period of 3.9 years, Initial capital 3.17 billion. Copper cathode production averages 450 million pounds per year. The life of mine is 21 years. The average production over the life of the mine is 327 million pounds per year. I would add in there that the first 5 years, 1 to 5, is 451 million pounds. The cost, C1 cash cost, 1.17 billion. The all-in sustaining cost, this is what I pay the most attention to, folks. $2.11 per pound of copper produced. Currently, the price of copper is about $3 a pound higher than that all-in sustaining cost. So when you look at three, $3 a pound in free cash flow times 450 million pounds, you're looking at a lot over $1 billion of free cash flow. I'm not a huge fan of NPV calculations, and because you're trying to take the future based on conservative numbers and roll it back to current and get a net present value for what that means into the future. And it also doesn't really factor in organic growth opportunities and opportunities to increase production. So I'm not a huge fan of NPV valuations relative to NPV. What I do pay a lot of attention to is the all-in sustaining costs and also how much they're going to produce. And, for the first 5 years, that's an awful lot of free cash flow. Free cash flow is king to me. I compare every company based on free cash flow analysis when it comes to miners, big cap miners, big cap companies. Free cash flow is what it's all about to me. When I see a $2.11 per pound all-in sustaining cost and 451 million pounds and put a $3 free cash flow on top of that, and I think that it will prove to be, even that will prove to be conservative, because by the time this gets into production in 2030, I think it starts construction in 2028. I think that number is going to grow dramatically on the copper price because again, we need a much higher price of copper to incentivize the increasing in production, which is dramatically needed. I mean, I would even make the case that even maintaining the current production in the copper mining space will be difficult. And what's needed is actually much higher copper production to meet the neat demands that are coming from things like artificial intelligence, which needs a lot of copper. That's today. You got robots in the future, electric vehicles worldwide. Demand is growing. So, yeah, we need a lot more copper is the bottom line. And we need a lot higher copper prices to incentivize that. Scale reserves and resources, mineral reserves are proven and probable of 10.2 billion pounds of copper. The mineral resources, so you exclude the proven and probable, and you've got measured and indicated of 5.4 billion pounds of copper, inferred of 20 billion pounds of copper, capital intensity using life of mine capital and production at 1,600 per ton of copper, initial capital and average annual production, 20,000 per copper per year. Designed for low impact. Leach and XXEW process produces 99.99% copper cathodes. with at an LME grade A on site, no smelter required. So not only can they produce pure copper on site that doesn't need to be uh, sent to another country for smelting. Like most copper mines, the copper stays right in Argentina where it could be used, or it's produced right in Argentina where it can be used to add value right in country, which makes this a very attractive uh, project for the economic well-being of Argentina. Project design provides 72% lower mine to metal carbon intensity than industry average for mine to metal, 100% renewable power, wind, hydro, solar, 74% less water use than conventional milling, no tailings dam, carbon neutral scopes one and two goal by 2038. So when this gives you a little insight into when Rob McEwen and the company talks about a mine of the future, they're designing it with these key characteristics included. And that has led to another news release that I'm going to talk about after I finish with this one. De-risked regulatory status, environmental impact statement, EIA, environmental permit for construction and operation was approved by the San Juan Provincial Government's Ministry of Mines in December 2024. They were recently accepted into Argentina's large investment incentive program regime in September 2025, so just a few weeks, or actually just last week, providing tax, foreign exchange, and customs stability for 30 years, legal certainty, foreign exchange regulations, allowing to leave export proceeds abroad in increasing steps that will reach 100% by the time the project starts exports and access to the international arbitration in case of disputes. You know, President Malay has made a commitment to try and get large investments into the country. And they have this program called the Large Investment Incentive Regime, or RIGI. And some of those large investment projects are copper mines. In the case of Los Azules, a copper mine. And they have been accepted into this program, which is a very important thing for the bottom line of the Los Azules project. So having that in conjunction with this feasibility study, very exciting stuff. So they talk about ownership and partners. So currently, McEwen Copper, which owns 100% of the Los Azules mine, is a private company. So the ownership is 60 or 46.4% is owned by McEwen Inc. Now, McEwen Inc. also owns a royalty, so that's one owner. Stellantis, one of the world's largest copper or car makers, owns 18%, 18.3% of McEwen Copper. Newton, which is a Rio Tinto venture, and they talk about what Newton is working on, also owns 17.2%, and Rob McEwen owns 12.7%. Victor Smorgon Group owns 3%, and others own 22.4%. So if you look at all the owners of McEwen Copper, it's a tightly held company. And I'm going to talk about why that's important towards the end of this presentation. Preliminary finance proposals from Tier 1 OEMs include Komatsu, Sandvik, and others. YPF lose, which will be important in the energy that will be needed for Los Azules. European ECAs and collaboration agreements with the International Finance Corporation, which, as I said earlier, is a member of the World Bank Group, um, to align with IFC's ESG standards for potential financing. So, in order to get financing from the IFC or the World Bank, you need to follow these ESG standards that are put out by the IFC. So they're collaborating together to move the project forward with those goals in mind. Indicative proposals could support 1.1 billion plus in equipment and infrastructure financing. So that is a reflection of the OEMs that they're talking to, which could cover a big part of the capital cost to build the mine. And then, on top of that, they could be talking about funding from the World Bank through this IFC situation. Future growth opportunities beyond the feasibility study. So earlier I said I'm not a big fan of net present value calculations because net present value is an accounting thing where they use certain parameters, if you will, and it doesn't really put in organic situations. And so and it uses very conservative numbers. So I'm not a big fan of NPV calculations. Nonetheless, let me go on. So future growth opportunities beyond the feasibility study. Neutron leaching technology. Earlier, I mentioned that Newton owns 17.2% of McEwen Copper, and Newton is a Rio Tinto venture. Could allow processing of primary ores with the existing infrastructure. Indicative recoveries of greater than 76%, or a conventional concentrator could also provide higher copper recoveries, plus recover gold and silver as well. Either process could extend mine life by 30 plus years by economically treating primary sulfides. Neither of these opportunities are included in the feasibility study base case. So there again, why you got to be careful about net present value calculations. Exploration has shown that there are four porphyry targets near the Los Azules deposit that could provide further extension to the mine life. Exploration of the newly identified targets will start in Q4 2025. We're in Q4 2025 right now. High priority targets near Los Azules include Tango, Provido Norte, Franca, and Mercedes. Timelines and next steps. Feasibility study the technical report will be filed within 45 days. Water concession application under review. Construction target 2026. SXEW startup in 2029. First copper production in 2030. So fast tracking this, as I've said before, when I've mentioned this project, it's just what Dr. Copper ordered. We need more of these going into production over the next 4 or 5 years in a big way in the copper business. In fact, I think the 5 to 10 year window is where the uh, supply problem could be most acute. And so this is coming on stream when the world needs a lot more copper. Now, in the footnote is an important thing here. Feasibility study uses a copper price of $4.35 a pound. We currently have copper trading at over $5 a pound. Now, this is one of the limiting factors of a problem that I see in the mining business. because using the current reporting standards, they force you to use very conservative numbers in your economic evaluations for resource estimates. So it's like, the regulations are always putting the mining industry putting a thumb on the scale, because it's, you're required to use conservative numbers, and this is constant years over years, which, has an impact on the valuations and how this stuff gets financed. And so I'm going to stop my rant on that right now. But as I said, $4.35 a pound were used. Average copper recovery is 70.8% over the life of mine. One of the things that you ought to always be doing when you're building a new mine and is trying to increase that recovery rate. Um, Power supply is 100% renewable with 48% lower electricity demand than a conventional concentrator. Collaboration agreement. So these are all the footnotes. You can take a look at that. So yeah, the big takeaways for me on this are the all-in sustaining costs when in production, $2.11 a pound, and they would be producing 451 pounds or 450 million pounds per year. So at $3 a free cash flow per pound produced, you're looking at generating about 1.23 billion of free cash flow. Now that doesn't all go towards McEwen Inc. because McEwen Inc. owns 46% and the royalty. So let's say about half of that goes towards the bottom line of McEwen Inc. And so, that's about 80%, 83% of the current valuation of McEwen Inc., which has a value of 958 million right now. So, you look out a few years and they are producing, when they get this into production, almost as much free cash flow as their current valuation. And that is one of the factors that I use when I consider that McEwen Mining is a key example for me when I talk about um, tremendous value propositions in the mining sector, because this is one asset. They they also have a junior gold mining operation, which produces about 135,000 ounces of gold in currently, and they're ramping that. They're working towards increasing that in 2026 and beyond. Their, let's say, 3 4 year goal is to get it over 250,000 or 200,000 ounces annually. So, that when you consider the world class, and that word gets thrown around a lot in the mining space, but when you consider that it is in the top 10 of undeveloped copper projects in the world, and it would be in the lowest cost quartile, you've got without a doubt, a world-class copper development project. Now, when you also factor in that for investors that want to be invested in those kind of companies, that asset could be meaningful for the value proposition of who owns it. Most of those other projects, some in the top 10, some of them are in permitting purgatory, and most of them are owned by uh, majors. So to have a junior or a smaller mining company owning that asset, a junior, there are only a few of the top 10 or a couple of the top 10 that fall into that category. Which brings me down back to something I've already touched on, value proposition. And part of the problem is that McEwen Inc. is currently the 46% owner of Los Azules with the royalty. It brings their economic benefits up, but it's in a private company that is so price discovery is difficult for the asset alone and what that means to McEwen Inc. that owns the big, almost half of it. And so one of the ways that they are looking at unlocking that value or price discovery of that asset is to take it public on the New York Stock Exchange. And so if you look at what that would look like, you got a company here that's 96 or 98, 7% owned by four entities, 4 or 5 entities. You've got McEwen Inc. owning the majority of it. You've got Rob McEwen owning about 13% of it. You got Stellantis owning about, what was it? You can look in the numbers earlier, but a big chunk of it. And Newton, a Rio Tinto venture, is owning a big chunk of it. So those four alone own like 95% of the company. So when you take it public on the New York Stock Exchange, what that means is that company will be very tightly held. The stock in that company, the ownership of that company will be very tightly held. So now you've got a new listed copper development company in the New York Stock Exchange. And so if investors want exposure to copper companies, they don't have very American investors don't have many opportunities when they want a listed company in the New York on the New York Stock Exchange. There's just not very many of those opportunities. And then getting back to the top 10 undeveloped copper projects in the world, if they want exposure to that, they only have a couple opportunities because most of those are owned by the major mining companies. And having a copper development company inside of a major mining company doesn't have that big of an effect on a positive effect on their valuation. It's not that yes, it's meaningful, but it's not as meaningful as being owned by a junior mining company like McEwen Inc. So I'm really excited about the prospect of them getting it publicly traded in on the New York Stock Exchange. I'm also very happy that I originally started covering this company back in the third quarter of 2022 when they were trading at about $4 a share. And I started doing a series of interviews with Rob McEwen, and not a lot of people were paying attention to the company. In fact, most of the coverage was negative on McEwen Mining at the time, now McEwen Inc. And but I thought that their copper asset was not being reflected in the valuation of the company properly. And so, as you can see from the around the $4 price where I first started, this is their Toronto listing, so it's in Canadian dollars. They were trading at about $4. They closed yesterday at $24.70. So it's been a very successful pick. Picks like that have outperformed a lot of assets. So I'm very happy about that. But lately, I've been really using McEwen Inc. as an example of tremendous value propositions in the mining business. They're one of my poster childs, if you will, for tremendous value propositions. And I'm really happy that that's being recognized over the last few months. And as you can see, the stock moved, let's say, from around the low, sort of around $10 in 2025. It's all, and now it's more than a double from the lows, the triple low that you saw here. Since doing that triple low in 2025. It has gone through a golden cross. The price has busted through in a very dramatic way the 200-day moving average and the 50-day moving average. And now it is consistently trading well above the 50-day moving average. And when I see a trajectory like this, and such a significant difference between the 50-day moving average and the price of the stock and the trajectory of the 200-day moving average. These are very bullish and mean onwards and upwards from here. And they've got the catalyst to see that happen with their junior gold, the junior gold producer that they have, mining company that they have, and now these important developments that are happening with McEwen Inc., including the partnering up, if you will, with the International Finance Corporation, a member of the World Bank. You got acceptance into the REGI program. I think you're going to see a lot of great developments coming out from the gold and the copper side of the company. And as you can see, they're getting very good attention. I think this is a crucial piece of news that, and with the potential for them to get a New York Stock Exchange listing, I think that will be a hot commodity. Sorry for the pun there. When it gets trading in America, because investors will want to get involved in assets like this that are publicly traded in America. I mean, we can even see it right now. You look at the difference between the average daily volume in Toronto, where it's listed, and the average daily volume dwarfs the Toronto when you look at the McEwen Inc. listing on the New York Stock Exchange. So much more liquid, much more opportunities to unlock value. So that's another factor. I would also point out in the chart, you look at the top left of the cup and handle. Here's the top left of it over the last year or so. It bottomed here in 2025. Now it's moving up the right side of the cup and handle. Right there, you have the, let's say, top of the right side of the cup and handle. There's the handle, very short-lived. The handle came down to the 50-day moving average. Then it's been onwards and upwards from then. And that's usually what you see coming out of a cup and handle for a company that has a tremendous value proposition, like I keep on pointing out with McEwen Inc. And so I see a lot of reasons to believe that we're onwards and upwards from here in the valuation of McEwen Inc., which makes me happy because I'm a shareholder of the company. So yeah, there you go. This is really important news for McEwen Inc., McEwen Copper, the Los Azules project, and as a example, a significant example in my reports of a company that I think has a tremendous value proposition in an industry that has a lot of tremendous value propositions. This company is one of my case studies and most used example of that. I like to see it being recognized as it has for since the April lows there. And I think it's got more to be recognized with. And I recently did a report where I call my unicorn picks. And what my unicorn picks are companies that have a very special project that can transform them into tremendously larger companies. I have two in the gold space, one in the silver space, and one in the copper space, which is McEwen Inc. And their Los Azules project. It to me is a copper unicorn. And what do I mean by a unicorn is that, well, in the tech industry, when a company has huge success, it's called a unicorn. And I think that McEwen Inc. could have a copper unicorn on its hands. And the reason I've given you the reasons why, and let me highlight them. Top 10 undeveloped copper project, lowest cost quartile. Most of those top 10 are all owned by major mining companies. The RIGI acceptance, the IFC acceptance. They're not getting involved because this is just another good copper project. It's a unicorn in my opinion. The potential to get listed, McEwen Copper get listed on the New York Stock Exchange, which then you look at the generalist investors in the United States that would be interested in some of this. And I think it all adds up to not an undiscovered gem, but a lot of value to be unlocked. I'm looking forward to more developments from the company. I think they'll have a lot to talk about with their catalysts from their gold mining operations and their copper. So when I take the collective uh, efforts that they're making on their junior gold mining side of the business and having the copper unicorn asset in Los Azules, and I look at the valuation of the company and the metrics that I pay most attention to is why I think that McEwen Inc. is a tremendous value proposition and ultimately one that I use as my case study or highest used example of tremendous value propositions in the mining sector. And there's several of those that are out there. So I'm going to leave it at that. I think you should do your homework on McEwen Inc. And the Los Azules Copper Project, their junior gold mining operations, and test my theory of whether I think that this is a tremendous value proposition. Because if you do your homework, I think you'll come out with the same estimate or outlook or forecast for McEwen Inc. Alrighty. Have a great day. Do your homework. Speak with your financial advisors. But before making any investment decisions, go to the company's website because if you want to do your homework, they got a phenomenal amount of information on their website for you to do that homework. Plus, I've done several interviews with Rob McEwen that you can find on my YouTube channel. I've talked about them many times in my reports that you can find on also on YouTube, but on my Substack at rocksandstocks.substack.com. There you go. Have a great day. Talk to you soon.